Indeed, I put it on the board, on the screen. One is always indebted to others for what one is. There's a lot of people here that many of us are indebted to, but today we are celebrating Jeff, and this is about our debt to Jeff. So what I'm going to talk is a mixture of kind of musing, sociological, literary musing, but that's very much Jeff-like, so to speak. And so that would be 2060 words with appreciations on bridges and bridge builders. It is always in times of crisis like ours, marked by a daunting divisiveness, an overwhelming mistrust of others, an erection of walls and fences, and mounting cultural and political clashes, that we try to find illuminating images that might help us to envision possible solutions and get on with our lives. The sources of such imagery are often to be found in the arts, literature, oral history. Poetry is known for its capacity in this regard, as it captures an otherwise inexpressible combination of historical and personal experience, of time and space, of intellectual and emotional insight. Literature helps us to imagine, and yes, to conceptualize, to see patterns while not losing sight of what's unique and specific. George Simmel, an impressionistic social thinker, though not given enough credit at the time when sociology was trying to prove its status as a science, George Simmel clearly shared such a sensibility with the artists of his time. Haunted by the unsettling volatility of the social world, he saw that the arts, often while contemplating the detail, can help us arrive at a view of the whole. Ultimately, this brilliant observer of modern life found a way to connect larger social phenomena with their specific manifestations and to communicate to others what is shaped by disparate experiences and is therefore unmistakable and special. Indeed, his sociology reveals a flair for detecting, in otherwise elusive reality, resilient shapes and designs that offer some sense of constancy and stability. In one of his early 20th century essays, Simmel wrote that those who first built a path between two places performed one of the greatest human achievements. In Bridge and Door, an essay published in Berlin 5 years before the First World War broke out, he explores these two objects as forms that capture a sense of both separation and unity. Every bridge and door reveal a linkage between connection and detachment, implying the possibility for both sociability and social compact. Indeed, to build a bridge, a path between two separated places, is to perform a great deed. But in times like these, in a society like ours, in societies like ours, as we face the erosion of shared world and the shortage of imagination, even the most compelling form is not enough. We also need a story. Simmel, who died in 1918, 2 months before the end of the World War I, had never met his partner in crime, the storyteller, Ivo Andrić, and had never read his story. The Bridge on the Drina, with its vast sweep of time, centers on one point in space and captures both the intrinsic and the instrumental value of that architectural structure. The novel was written by Andrić during the Second World War, another war then, and was published only 2 months before the war ended. It was another 6 years before he received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1961. Brought up in Sarajevo, and a university student when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated there, Ivo Andrić was a student activist in the young Bosnia movement for an independent South Slav state, who studied history and literature at the oldest universities of the empire, of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, in Zagreb, Krakow, and Prague. When he heard the news of the Sarajevo assassination, Andrich left Krakow, went home, and immediately got arrested. He was this, they remember they had him on the lists of the students, activists, and spent several months in prison. But a decade later, with a doctorate in history from the University of Graz, he was a junior diplomat working for the new state, a long-awaited South Slavia, a country that brought together Southern Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, Slovenes, Macedonians, Montenegrins. So having been colonized by the two continental empires, the Ottoman and the Austro-Hungarian, the South Slav state only became known as Yugoslavia in 1929. An ambassador to Hitler's Germany, Andrich was arrested again in Berlin, because Yugoslavia was then taken by Nazis in Berlin in 1941, and returned by now German-occupied Belgrade, and became a storyteller. Drawn to sources passed down through the generation by word of mouth and to the social experience locked within them, Ivo Andrich left us a book that as soon as we touch it, immediately comes to life, like the premonitory poetry of Czesław Miłosz, despite the story's distance in time and space. Well, since this is a special occasion and since Jeff knew the poet, Czesław Miłosz, let me quote this brief poem by Miłosz, entitled, "And Yet the Books." And yet the books will be there on the shelves, separate beings that appeared once, still wet as shining chestnuts under a tree in autumn, and touched, cuddled, began to live. In spite of fires on the horizon, castles blown up, tribes on the march, planets in motion. Why does a book of historical fiction, the Bridge on Drina River, that spans almost 400 years and deals with the lives of people in an obscure Pashalik of Bosnia under the Ottomans and then Habsburgs, why does that book still matter? Well, that is because it was an unlikely, it has an unlikely protagonist, a ground bridge itself. And I quote, "A rare structure of unique beauty, such as many richer and busier towns do not possess," unquote. And it is this bridge that imposes on the flow of historical experience a form that gives it not just meaning and order, but also humanity. The Bridge on Drina, on that Drina, a novel about the physical structure, but also about lives that have unfolded around it and been defined by it, is the story of an actual, not imagined bridge in today's Eastern Bosnia and Herzegovina that suffered numerous injuries in the course of history, but still stands today. The construction of the bridge, ordered in 1566 at the height of the Ottoman Empire by the Grand Vizier Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic, was to connect the Bosnian and Serbian banks of the Drina River and to provide a pathway towards the eastern part of the empire and its capital, all the way to Istanbul. But there is an affective dimension of the tale of the bridge's origins, linking it directly to Grand Vizier Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic, who was born in the nearby village of Sokolovici, became one of the stolen children, young boys who were taken away from their peasant parents as part of child levy by the Ottoman state. Then he was trained as a janissary and a member of the Sultan elite guard. Later in life, Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic became the highest executive of the empire, prime minister of a sort in today's terms. As the story goes, what he could never forget were the desperate cries of his mother, who was following the convoy on foot, along with other mothers, grandmothers, and sisters of the stolen children. When they came too close writes Andrich. The Aga horsemen would drive them away with whips, urging their horses at them with loud cries to Allah. Then the women would fly in all directions and hide in the forest along the roadside, only to gather again a little later behind the convoy and strive with tear-filled eyes to see once again over the panniers of the heads of the children who were being taken from them. When the convoy approached the river, the children were transferred to a ferry and the mothers could not go any further. The Drina River, with its deep rapids, meant the ultimate closing of the door, a painful separation. And it was at this very spot, several decades later, that Grand Vizier Mehmet Pasha Sokolovich gave the order to erect a magnificent bridge. Andrich's story of its building by Master Rade the Mason and its highly skilled workers brought in from all over the empire is an account of sacrifice, resistance, martyrdom, punishment, and love. Although only symbolically etched into the bridge, its tales of determination and passion made it all the grander. There's more than one way of reading The Bridge on the Drina. It's a controversial book for some. And I have been reading and rereading it as a tribute to the social imagination of the bridge builder and to his concept of an architectural design that in times of anxiety and despair offered comfort and hope. While the bridge connected the two shores of the Drina, one with rural settlements and the other with the small, ethnically diverse town of Visegrad, which we see grow and flourish over time, it was much more than just a picturesque overpass mounted up on 11 graceful arches. As envisioned by the master builder, once you reach the central pier of the bridge, it suddenly doubles in width. So it's like that, but then it's like that. Doubles in width, opening up space that allows for something more than just the crossing it on foot or horseback. In fact, it is not so much the bridge itself that has always interested me, as this additional physical space in the middle of it called capilla, the capilla, a word that is common to all languages of the area, whether spoken by Serbs, Croats, or Bosnians, and which means gate, another kind of door. The bridge social and cultural power lay in this capilla, this extra space with terraces and benches on either side that could accommodate conversations, get-togethers, or the savoring of Turkish coffee by those who most frequently use the bridge: Muslim Bosnians, Turks, Orthodox Christian Serbs, Jews, and later also Catholic Croats. The capilla, a public square on a bridge, was a place where those who would otherwise not meet could sit, look at each other, and get to know each other. Not a marketplace, not a temple, not a court, not even an agora. The capilla was a place that people did not have to come to or stop at, but they did. Granted, many of them had walked long distances and were certainly tired, but they could have chosen to stop at a square that connected the bridge to a Visegrad marketplace just 200 paces down from the bridge. But they did not. They stopped here. With stone-carved sofas, benches, the copper coffee maker stand, and the bustle of people speaking different tongues and worshiping different gods, the capilla was open to all, young and old, lepers and beggars. The storyteller turns the bridge into a witness, but the capilla is a site of hospitality and hosts to an experience that is both immersive and, according to the storyteller, transformative. Some sociologists may think about it as a modality. It was this visible but neutral site in the middle of the bridge that first facilitated initial contact and then encouraged just being with others, just feeling at home with each other. It brought into experience something that had not been there before, an invisible structure that enabled people to look through the other's lenses and plant seeds of trust. If we could lift the image of Capilla from the novel and shift it, as Zimmel might have done, into some modern public space, what might its new features and principles look like? Well, one of them would be the original's in-betweenness. Even if not mounted up on white stone arches or hovering above the river, it would be still be a site of indeterminacy and horizons, and uncannily benevolent borderland in which the very notion of sharp borders is conspicuously absent. Its welcoming ambience would provide an inclusive space for conversation, meaningful encounter, and the recognition of other worlds. Conversation like attendance at a theatrical performance or Jeff's democracy seminar is voluntary, not obligatory. First, we have to agree to talk and agree to listen to each other's stories, and thus get to know each other. By offering an unaccustomed experience of familiarity and closeness, the new Capilla, like its Banja stone original, it was made from the stone brought from Banja, which is part of what used to be Yugoslavia. So by offering an accustomed experience of familiarity and closeness, this new Capilla would open up possibilities for building or restoring relationships of trust and solidarity, thus opening up new prospects for the future. The Capilla, richly textured space inhabited by different voices and faces, whether old or new, is a lookout, by which I mean not an outpost or guardhouse, but a place from which one can see far beyond. Such lookouts have been, for example, the harbor cities of Gdańsk, Odessa, Lübeck, or New York, full of different flavors and voices. This is where foreign sailors bring the sound of their respective languages, along with their foods, customs, and costumes. And Capilla then, any Capilla then, as a still hosting various cultures, where one can see more and imagine more, is one that, though a man-made construction, may indeed be called a natural site for dialogue. The idea of Capilla is not a ready-made possibility, but rather something people have to work on, to envision, and then to build. It provides an Arendtian space of appearance, which, if frequented enough and if concerned with public matters, makes acts of democratic performativity possible. Hannah Arendt warned us that social isolation, a byproduct of the closing of the public square, closing of the door, breeds ignorance and despair. When public square is forced into a state square, in which even limited interactions are controlled and staged, and when only one voice is heard coming anonymously through the loudspeakers or television screens, ignorance is rewarded by the state square's provision of an often comforting kind of certainty. And once the space for dialogue and dialogue itself are gone, in the environment of a monological culture, hate speech and fabricated news can thrive and exploit its performative capacity to incite violence. Let me presume to suggest how close Vladimir Putin is coming to achieving an apotheosis of that very path. There are many for whom a life without dialogue, a life in certainty and monologue seems reassuring and convenient. There are others for whom the only true reality is that of postmodern chaos, in which it would be futile to frame the world as coherent and knowable. In either case, any effort to build bridges in today's bitterly divided societies must thus appear to be a non-starter. Still, I believe there are sites, universities, for example, that offer the potential for smaller and larger capillas of many kinds. And democracy seminar is an excellent example here. Another instance I know very well is in the small provincial town of Sejny in northeastern Poland, about the size of Visegrad, located near the Lithuanian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian borders, an area historically prone to ethnic conflict. Sejny is a town very busy with building bridges. Once lingual and multi-religious, with a large part of the population historically Jewish. Today, Sejm is home to Borderlands, Pogranicze, a collective of artists and thinkers. Half a minute. They managed to engage the local residents in exploring the town's histories, identifying sources of tension, and discovering the potential to inspire encounters, to reconnect and to transcend what has seemed to be an ingrained and irreconcilable divisiveness. The ideas and social practices this collective tapped into had been cultivated over the centuries in the borderlands, and re-embracing them has activated the process of what they called repairing broken connective tissues. The process takes time. Borderlands has been at work for over 30 years, and healing is incremental. And there is no physical bridge, but rather a concept, a Zimmelian non-material form that bears out that thinkers' faith in the possibility of building pathways where there had been none before. Let me just skip one paragraph, and this is one last sentence. Czesław Miłosz, whose family, former summer house in Sejny, Krasnogróda, now serves as this year-round kapia, would be delighted to see, in spite of the fires on the horizon, castles blown up, tribes on the march, planets in motion. There is a bridge here that has its own storytellers, and that there are many books on the shelves of Krasnogróda, including The Bridge on the Drina. I would like to give Jeff a bow of admiration for building continuously with friends and students sturdy bridges with capias at this university, thus planting seeds of intellectual creativity, social imagination, and badly needed trust. Thank you.